Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you're good. Hope you can hear me. All the usual paranoia over the technology. First, that happens to be listening live that fancies telling me that things are working, please let me know. And the title for this video should be episode 188, Freedom Day for the UK as Australia locks down. If it isn't and it's got Friday's titles on it, that is a glitch that I'm working on. I don't know why it's happened. And apologies to those that tuned into Friday's show and were confused at the title. It's because of that problem where it just doesn't seem to sometimes update the title. So sorry about that, but thanks for joining. I've had some banter recently, which I've been really enjoying, where people say that I start every episode at the moment saying, I'm really excited for this episode. No, I am. I'm not lying. I'm not juicing it up, right? I enjoy it. I can't believe it. What a lucky boy I am to have these conversations with such fascinating people, and today's no different. So I am excited. I'm not just saying it, not just trying to be a hype man, I promise. And so thank you to Isabella, who has first on the draw on LinkedIn, I understand, said everything's working fine. So thank you very much for letting me know that all the sound is good. And it'll be helpful for you to say the same when I bring my guest on. My guest today is Blaise Doran, and someone I've had some fascinating conversations over the years with. And I'm absolutely delighted that he's joining, especially because of a time zone difference that I thought might be prohibitive. But he's joining in his evening time from Australia. And it was a great idea for us. As I put out on Twitter, who should I chat to on Freedom Day? And he didn't necessarily throw his hand up, so I've roped him in a little bit. But he's got such a great contrast, and I thought that would be such an interesting episode for us to talk about on Freedom Day, as it's being called in the UK, and all of those challenges it brings. So hopefully in a couple of clicks, I can hide my little frame and bring on Blaise. Blaise, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. How are you? Can you hear me?
Well. I can, and hopefully the listeners can, and they'll let us know in the chat in a second, no doubt, if they can or can't. But I think everything's working well. Start off with then, could you just introduce yourself to the listeners briefly, and then tell us a little bit about the circumstances that you're in right now in Australia?
I'm Blaise Doran. I was originally a very long time ago an actor, and then I retrained as a physiotherapist in the UK. I am from the UK originally, and I migrated to Australia in 2006. So I've been living here since then. And the circumstances we find ourselves in now. So last Thursday evening, the Premier, the leader of the state that I live in, which is Victoria, announced that the whole of the state would go into a hard lockdown because of some Delta variant COVID-19 infections in the community. So we have, what a hard lockdown means here is that we can't travel more than about 3 miles away from home. You can go out once a day, one person once a day to the shops. You're allowed to exercise for 2 hours a day, but not with more than 2 other people, or one other person, I think it is. You have to wear masks indoors and outdoors, except in your own home. You have to, you are allowed to go for emergency health treatment. You're allowed to go for a COVID test, and you're allowed to go for a vaccination if you can find one. So that's a hard lockdown. That's a hard lockdown. Sure. And the other thing is that means that where possible, my work, which is at the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne, they tell you that if it's possible, work from home. So that includes me in outpatient, physiotherapy situations. So I would be seeing the patients I'm seeing tomorrow online, which is an interesting experience. Yeah, but I've done it, I did it for the 111-day lockdown in Melbourne. So there we go.
Well, yeah, back to those sort of Groundhog Day style feelings again, I guess. And,
yes.
And so yeah, it's pretty interesting contrast then. So of course, as the titles say, we're into Freedom Day. I've just been reminded by Daniel Gerber, who said, "Please remember, it's the UK, it's England on its own." And so yeah, thank you to one of my favourite nationalists, Daniel Gerber, to remind us of that. And so I enjoy his contributions, especially when he pretends that Scotland's a real country. I thank you, Daniel, for that. So yeah, he's making that point, and that's a fair one. It's England, and we're lifting restrictions, and by that it being legal mandates. And there's a couple of things that mean that why when I put Freedom Day in the titles, it's like, there are several things that are still going to be disruptive, and also there's several different, I've just been out to the supermarket and you've got still majority mask wearing even though there's no legal mandate to it, or there wasn't any signage to indicate that that is something that they prefer in this particular supermarket. But there's still a culture in which we're still going to be in amongst it with regards to the fact that people are taking their individual risk assessment. But there's also the fact that we're having this big spike in sort of track and trace. It's become a verb which is weird, to have been pinged. I've been pinged by the track and trace app, right? So we're getting patients cancelling, and that's still going to be something that is going to greatly affect people. So amusingly, if enough people get pinged, they're going to be locked down because there's so much self-isolation going on. We're at 50,000 plus cases as of yesterday, and so that's why it's certainly freedom with a small f at the very least. So interesting contrast technically by legal mandate then between us as nations. Blaise, but obviously one of the big differences, I guess, in the nations has been the fact that COVID can only be described as having ravaged the UK, whereas it's been somewhat, Australia has been protected from it in terms of high case rates, hospitalizations, deaths, in part by a very restrictive, particularly travel policies, but also various different significant internal policies. So how would you describe the key differences in approaches that have then meant that that's led to those differences in outcomes?
It's been interesting. I mean, obviously, there's the obvious thing of where we are and our geography. Not just, I mean, in the sense of where we are in the world. Obviously, that is one thing, quite isolated, really. But it's an island continent. You can control the borders to a greater extent, and that's exactly what they've done. And they did it pretty quickly after, the World Health Organization was calling it a pandemic. Before then, I think Australia locked down its borders to incoming travellers from certain areas, particularly from China. And even if they had Australian passports, I think at the time, I could be corrected on that. But anyway, the other aspect has been, and the major difference is because we are a federation in Australia, we have a prime minister who sits over the federal government, but we also have states and state premiers. So what's currently happening at the moment is that the federal government is supposed to be responsible for two main things. One is quarantine, and the other is vaccination. So in these kind of pandemic situations, that's the agreement that's written into the law, if you like. What the current Prime Minister negotiated was that the states would take on the quarantine aspect by doing hotel quarantine, and that the federal government would negotiate the vaccine part of things. So because we have a particular Prime Minister who you might kind of think of if you're from the UK as being in the kind of conservative side of things, or liberal nationals as they call them here, he's a background where his hashtag, slightly sarcastic hashtag on Twitter is Scotty from marketing. So it's Scott Morrison, because that's the industry he used to work in. He used to work in, marketing. He did the crappy campaign of where the bloody hell are you for Australia, which didn't go down particularly well. So he's got that kind of background, and he's very much a spin merchant.
I was just about to say, so he's a spin doctor. Is he like the Alistair Campbell school of spin?
He is. He's also a massively good gaslighter as well. So he'll say, you'll say something. You said this. No, I didn't say that, and then it's not my fault. Whether it's bushfires saying I don't hold the hose, it's not a race. That was the other thing about the vaccine thing, which we can come to. But anyway, that's what they're supposed to be responsible for. Okay. They palmed off the quarantine to the states, and then what happened from that, as things happen everywhere across the world, is that there's now a drive in public health, I suppose, and other public systems to contract out, get a reasonable quote for a job to be done. So the security for the hotel systems, particularly in Victoria, was done by private contractors. Mm-hmm. Private contractors who had no idea about infection control, private contractors who subcontracted to other private contractors, and so on and so forth. So there was a great kind of falling down of the infection control chain. And what happened is that various people became infected by incoming travelers. They went to their areas and their families spread it around there.
Right.
That's when Melbourne got locked down, and that was the first major kind of lockdown in the country. What's happened since is that that the states have the capacity to shut down borders, so that you can't travel. Yeah, state borders. So you can't travel without a strict permit from Victoria to WA, and unless you go into 14 days of quarantine.
Right.
When you arrive at that state.
Just on that, I think that's one of the things for those that haven't been to Australia or those that don't know enough about it to kind of get how on earth that would be feasible. Imagine, if you tried to place a county border even in the UK, right? It's not the same because you've not got a really distributed road network. I'm not going to be scenarios just to say it's one highway, but to some degree, especially I travelled, say, Queensland, New South Wales and stuff, there are not many roads to stop that flow. Is that fair to say? And therefore it is doable.
Very fair to say.
Not necessarily, I'm not saying it's the right thing to do, but I'm just meaning that, comparatively, that's something that for those that haven't been to Australia, it might sound mad that you could partition, but you could, couldn't you? And it clearly have been.
And because there are usually only major highways that go between the kind of state areas, it doesn't mean it's impossible. You can get across small roads and you can actually travel across the desert if you're good enough at it. But, I think there are few and far between people who've tried to do that. Okay. So basically, we are in lockdown. What happened about the Victorian thing is the whole COVID-19 and its management became a massive political football. Big surprise. The same thing happened in the UK. And one of the things that Scott Morrison, the current Prime Minister, said was that, when it comes to the COVID-19 vaccines, Australia is at the front of the queue. Front of what queue? I don't know, but it was the wrong queue. So basically, they put all their eggs in one basket, mostly because they had the infrastructure here to produce vaccines from the AstraZeneca style of vaccine. So there's a place in Melbourne that can actually produce that kind of vaccine, but there isn't anywhere in Australia that can produce the mRNA type of vaccine. So we didn't get much of the Pfizer. Huge political thing happened when our advisory board for immunization said that because of the blood clotting risk for AstraZeneca, it shouldn't be given, first of all. Well, the preferred vaccine for the 50s and under 50s would be Pfizer, of which we only at the time had 10 million doses on order. We hadn't even actually got many of them, prior to that. Sure. And so they were producing the AstraZeneca in allegedly large numbers, but we found out not quite as large as they said they were. And then they just, Atagi, who's the immunization advisory board, basically said maybe not, 60s and under, should get the Pfizer vaccine. So it's been going on this kind of huge political football about, did we get enough vaccine? Did we get it at the right time? We're not going to be getting any major stock of Pfizer until probably October.
Well, one of the things I think, if we can, I want to come back to vaccines in part because of the interesting variables we were just talking about off air about vaccine hesitancy, because one of the main motivating factors about getting vaccinated is the imminence of or the likelihood of exposure and things in the UK has meant that that's been one of the things that's fueled, as well as other various cultural factors and things that have then contributed to high uptake to date, which you can understand some of the mechanisms not necessarily playing out the same in Australia. Still highly contentious political issue, as well as the fact that there's still, as you're describing, supply issues as well as demand. It's more complex. And I do want to get stuck into that, I think, because I think it's a really interesting one when we do this compare and contrast. But one of the things that we have had is, you couldn't argue, some maybe might, there's people that would say that we've had more porous borders than we should have, but I don't think people could ever argue that we've had free-flowing traffic necessarily. It's international travel still, and literal planes in air is vastly reduced, you know. So, but comparative to Australia, our border policy has been very different in that yours has been right up there as being the highest. And we were talking just off air about the fact that we were due in Australia for a wedding in Sydney this autumn, and we've known now for 9 months or something that was not going to be happening. I think you had literally the calendar year of 2021, regardless of what happened, it was no foreign visitors for the likes of something as frivolous as a wedding. And so I want to just get your raw reflections on that policy and its challenges, and whether or not any of the trade-offs have been in the public dialogue on that.
Gosh, this is a really difficult one, because on the one hand, you can see why it's appealing, okay, to a populace to say, we will protect you by stopping people from coming in. But that also means there's a I can't remember what the figure is, but it's in the thousands, because of the way in which Australians are known for travelling, of Australians who are abroad, Australian passport holders, Australian citizens who are abroad, who are not able to come back to the country because of the caps on people they're allowing to return, because they can't get flights that they can afford, because, you know, there's all sorts of questionable ethics, if you like, around that. There's a big human rights issue in my own eyes, is that I'm not allowed to leave the country unless I have a strict dispensation to do so. What does that mean? Well, say, for example, somebody passed away. I might be able to get back to the UK because I have family there, but I might not. You know, it's not guaranteed. They may not let you out. They may not think it's a good enough reason for you to go. But, you know, if you earn enough money for the country and you run a business, you seem to be able to get in and out of the country fine. If you are a celebrity, you seem to be able to get in and out of the country fine. If you're an American movie star, you seem to get them in and out of the country fine. If you're Katie fricking Hopkins, you seem to be able to get into the country. She's just arrived at Sydney to do... somebody approved on Katie Hopkins is a virus in my view. Sorry, I've just read one of the comments.
The reason is she what is it?
She was supposed to be joining. She was supposed to be joining the Big Brother house in Sydney. Now, I think people don't quite know. Maybe they do. This is what disturbs me about Australia sometimes. Maybe they do understand quite how vitriolic and virus-like Haiti Hopkins is, but maybe they was just ignorant. And but she's got kicked out. She got kicked out because she was making a mockery of the hotel quarantine system, and they rescinded her visa and they cancelled her contract. So she's spent. But
she got in. They gave it a chance enough for her to get in order to then run amok.
Anyway, you know, the other side, you see, that there's all those things where people are desperate to come back home for various reasons. They may be in different countries. Like, they shut down flights coming in from India for 2 weeks, and there's a fair Indian population, or kind of Indian Australian population. They're Australian passport holders, but they're like a lot of people in Australia, were of different nationalities to begin with, and they couldn't get back home. They just stopped all flights from India.
Yeah.
See, those kind of things, I question the legality of that. But in terms of international law, they've argued that constitutionally they're allowed to do it because it's based on health reasons.
I think, and I know this is an oversimplification for the sake of brevity, because I'm not good at brevity. We all know this. So I'm going to try though, and say that I get my spidey senses go off a little bit when it's like this excessive safetyism to bring in policies that seem superficially to mean well, but have downstream consequences in breach of significant liberal human rights baselines that we've worked up. So it sort of feels like it reminds me a bit of the Patriot Act, right? In America, when it's like it's like we need to protect you from these terrorists, and so we're going to bug your phones. Like, hold on. Let's be proportional, and we can, again, it sounds instinctively pleasant in times of crisis, but what are you doing? It's the baby bathwater moment in many ways. So one of the latter part of my question to you, which I've interrupted, so it's probably where you were going, is how much of the conversation that you've just described and what I've just invited a bit of my reflections on is being had, like those trade-offs. How is that part of the public dialogue? Is that actually a healthy and mature conversation that people are trying to weigh up, or is it just?
Look, it's difficult when you're in isolation to have conversations like that. But without being too sarcastic, but it's true. The sort of people I would be able to mix with and talk about these things will be in my echo chamber. So that yes, there are conversations like that, and we agree with ourselves that that's probably pretty harsh, and particularly because you tend to know a lot of people whose original heritage is not necessarily Australian. So there's that. But then there's a lot of Australians who may actually feel, and I've got to acknowledge this, that they may actually feel comfortable with the idea that no, don't let people in. Don't let people in with the viruses. And there is there's an undertow of racism in a lot of Australian society. And early on in the piece, there were a lot of kind of racist attacks on Asians. They didn't necessarily have to be from China, but they just had to look Asian. Verbal abuses, graffiti on houses, and all that kind of stuff. So there's a section of the population who is very comfortable with this, but it seems to be a kind of there isn't a consistency. You're familiar with this in the UK. There's inconsistency in how the rules are applied. So if it wasn't for a public outcry, Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson wouldn't be in isolation at the moment, would they?
No, yeah. we are the UK's opposition.
Absolutely, and that's fantastic that people kicked up such a stink that they weren't even considering isolating after Javid.
It was news to me that hypocrisy matters enough anymore. It's like I've been watching
absolutely
inconsistency.
But then again, this is the
actually did it, which was good.
I think this is the thing that's personally matters to people is that I have done this, I have made sacrifices. Why the effity F haven't you? And I think that's the same in Australia. So there's a lot of people who kind of think, well, you don't start taking the piss because you excuse my language, but you'll end up with a situation where you'll use up all your political gains from having locked something down, and this is what's happening at the moment. But the state premiers are generally more popular than the prime minister at the moment because they're seen to be doing a better job of it than the prime minister. And so, coming back to your question, yes, there are a lot of people who probably think this is great. This is keeping us safe. To me, it's. I get too deep about these things, but I sometimes wonder whether it's the Australia's background as a carceral state, as a prison colony, that people, seem to be quite cowed by authority. So if you're told you're not going to do this, then people are going, okay.
Yeah,
well, there's a lot of stuff, where even, if I went out today without a mask and was caught, it would be £100 fine.
Outdoor masking never really got here. That's a fascinating thing that you've just told me about. That's a bit of a. It's not a new one to me because I've heard about some states in America, but I didn't realize it was. That just. Because there's a lot of symbolism that comes with that, especially with regards to sort of the data on effectiveness of various different things. Of course, when we realised it was airborne, then it just seems a bit of a there's something social consciousness wise that you can imagine. But outdoor masking is that commonplace or what?
Oh yeah, it is. It's well, it's been commonplace in Victoria certainly.
Right.
So what? The arguments have been, so if you take the example of recent contact sites, one is there are two football stadiums, the France versus Australia game and an AFL game that was going on between Carlton some other team. I can't remember. Who cares? But the fact was that people were sitting in the stadium that weren't close to the index case, and they're in a different part of they're close enough in terms of where the people were sat, but what they're worried about is you're getting these fleeting contact type situations with the Delta variant. And so what they're suggesting is wearing a mask even outdoors. Probably what they're going for is a bit like Trish Greenhalgh's idea, is that, even if it reduces the risk by 0.01%, that's still significant if the population that's risk of infection is large enough. So the other thing is that perhaps you're not spreading it if you are infective in the community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so I think that's the only. But I think it's these kind of mandated ways of doing it. I mean, I've forgotten what freedoms are, if I'm honest, because some of these things are a bit weird now. I will do it because I think I have a very strong sense of, if you like, public duty, with the healthcare knowledge as well, and I know that the potential for overwhelming a healthcare system is very real. Never happened to me though. So I wasn't somebody, who's ever needed to be redeployed or anything like that. Which was, and I think that the major thing that annoys people about the lockdowns is it has a massive economic implication, and particularly if you think about physiotherapists in Australia, by far the majority of the people who are have the most control over the Australian Physiotherapy Association are private practice therapists, musculoskeletal private practice therapists.
Right.
They can still see people if it's urgent, but if it's not for routine care. So there's a kind of dodgy line there. As if your business is starting to suffer, you're going to say, "Well, can I make this person? Can I justify seeing this person?" I think
we've climbed out because that you can't protect that conversation from a styles of practice conversation, and we kind of are out of that now in a way. It'll forever be there in the profession, and rightly so in many ways. Mechanisms of effect and styles of care and practice, or interventions, rehab versus manual therapy, whatever. Well, we kind of had that. It came to a head last spring, summer, and it doesn't feel like that's lingered on, in part because of the fact that we have found a way, which is what's interesting, is because we have had to create a version of living with COVID. You've not had it. That's what's
not in the same way.
Because not in the same way. Yeah, it's different. I want to make sure just before we go. I'm so sorry that we're out of time soon, because we could go on, and it's been great.
It's probably because we do go on, both of us.
Yeah, well, both of us, we're guilty of that, aren't we? Yeah. For those of you that we should, I'm sure if we should sell tickets into the afterword, me and you will probably end up having when we're off there
an hour conversation after.
On this. But I wanted to just make sure I planted a flag, because I think what's really, I can't believe me luck that you were available today to do this, because I think that those sorts of trade-offs, especially with regards to border policy, human rights, but also there's a real pessimism over the voluntarism, right? We never tested that. I just feel like it's really painful, and especially interprofessionally, and this is one of the painful things where I'm speaking to a lot of my audience here that I'm going to piss off, and I'm all right with that. You might not be, but there's a lot of you out there, including I love you to bits and you're good thinkers, but you've got to. Some of you, I feel, are saying, when you're really beckoning more and more mandates, and I feel you're indulging some of the safetyism that I'm a critic of. That's not the news. The news is that when you're saying about the fact that you want these things to continue, distancing and masking classically, you're not talking about you, are you? You're saying, I'm going to do this, right? It's the other. It's these plebs that can't be trusted. And you're not hearing that part of your thinking. And I don't think you'd like yourself for it. And I'm sorry to be that guy holding the mirror up, but you're not on about you, are you? You're saying, I'm going to be responsible, but they can't be trusted. Who's there? And when you unpack the there, you're not recognizing some of your privilege, to use a buzzword on this. And it's an ugly corner of it. And I'm sorry, because I do love you all, but some of you are doing that a lot more than I'd like. And to hear from Blaise. Not I'm putting words in his mouth. Right? I don't know. He might disagree with me wholeheartedly on that, and I'd invite that. But I'm just kind of describing the fact that two countries have gone about things very differently, got some of the same challenges, but some different challenges, and a mature conversation about trade-offs, including the avoidance of othering people, especially with regards to what it could do with the powder keg of xenophobia that we've kind of talked a bit about, that can exist and we know exists and is an ugly underbelly of many different cultures, is something that I think we cannot ignore. And the time frame now is such that we should be having as much of a mature dialogue as we can about these things, rather than the deep conviction in which people go in about things in an unchecked, biased manner. I wanted to make sure I spat that out today of all days. Again, Blaise, I'm not trying to put, I'm not putting any of that on you, but in this show, it would have been remiss for me to not talk about it. I wonder if I could just invite you to just give a few final remarks for the last couple of minutes, if you wish.
So I think some of the things you make, I made comments to colleagues that I work with, is that part of the reason why it got out of hand in Melbourne before the 111-day lockdown that we went through, and with the very harsh conditions that we had, was the fact that people weren't considering the people who lived in the areas that were going there, mostly people who spoke English as a second or third or fourth language, the people who are low socioeconomic status, the people who have to travel across the city in order to be able to do their work for the low pay that they get. They're the Uber delivery drivers, they're the people who clean your offices and so on and so forth. Of course, if they're sick, they don't have anything to back them up and they will go to work. And that's the reason why it gets spread around. So you can't blame them for it, because they are living a hand-to-mouth existence. And you can't blame for the fact that they are having to try and understand health orders that are primarily published in English and then translated after the fact.
Good point.
It's just one of those things that people kind of don't consider necessarily, that they're not doing it just to be bloody minded or stupid or dumb. They're doing it because they have to.
Well, and also the same people carrying weighing heavy judgment on these people are often, not always, but often the people that would corrupt any sensible conversation about social safety netting and the various large political decisions that we need to try and make as civilized societies, to try and work out what is that safety net, and how that we protect ourselves as a set of nations, as communities, from those sorts of events in which people might need to either accidentally or purposefully have to ignore public health guidance as a means of existence for their own ability to keep their families safe. We've not in this episode been able to get stuck into some of the mental health and other social sequelae that we know have occurred. Unfortunately, we lost a friend to alcoholism in lockdown, of which the data is now out, and the underestimation of pubs as a mitigator of alcoholism by social solidarity, and the fact that you've got a landlord and friends, etc., that will say that's enough and to look after you, and the massive toll that drug and alcohol abuse has seen behind closed doors. Again, a trade-off seldom discussed, and one that in these series of shows this week, no doubt this is going to come back up. And so thank you for kicking us off on this, Blaise. It's been absolutely brilliant to catch up with you on air, and hopefully we can make this work again sometime, especially I won't keep you up too late, but really do appreciate it.
Well, thanks for your indulgence, everybody.
No, it's been brilliant. And sorry to those of you that have not been able to draw your comments in as much as usual. We've just had we got stuck into the conversation, but we will definitely use those to fuel future discussions into this week and beyond, and I really appreciate it. And we will have definitely more, especially when I have my solo sessions, we'll draw on some of these comments and themes. But thanks for now, and bye, Blaise. Take care.
See ya.